Welcome to a radical discussion of independence, free will, liberty, and the left-hand path. This is Daimonsophy with your host, Paul Frederick.
Welcome, fellow friends and Damons, to another episode of Daimonsophy. My guest today is Dr. Stephen Flowers, former University of Texas professor and lecturer, and a PhD of Germanic and Medieval Studies, founder of the Rune Guild, the Setian Magus of the word Runa. He's written dozens of books, many of which you may have heard me talking about on this show, like Lords of the Left-Hand Path or The Good Religion. Dr. Flowers, welcome to the show. It's such an honor to have you.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I'm looking forward to speaking with you.
Excellent. So I have to ask you this question. This is what I like to ask everyone. How did you first find the left-hand path?
How did I first find the left-hand path? Well, I was a kid in the late 60s, early 70s, and it was strange things were in the air in those days, and so I saw things about Anton LaVey and all that kind of thing. Just got fascinated with that when I was in high school, and then subsequently joined that organization, which was nothing more than just writing in and getting a medallion and a card and all that sort of thing. And so I never met anyone or was involved with anybody in that organization back then. And so it was just the beginning of a more formal kind of approach to this as opposed to just reading about it and thinking about it and so forth. And so that's what I would say I first sort of got some familiarity with the idea and with the term, let's say, and say, well, this is okay to rebel against the status quo of human and my social and cultural environment, and so that was the beginning of it. It was just things that were very much a part of popular culture in those days. And so not many people acted on it, of course, but I was kind of odd that way.
And so this is around in the early 70s?
Well, early, very, very early, 1970, 1971, right in there. I wrote in high school, in most high schools everywhere, I would imagine you have to, in your senior year, you write a major research paper, and I was also always fascinated with horror movies, horror science fiction movies and such, because I was a monster kid growing up in the early 60s and so forth, being a kid back then, and that was also just part of the popular culture. And so I wrote my paper on basically the history and reality and such that was to be found in Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. Wow. And so that's what I wrote my paper on. And in doing research for that, you couldn't find any research materials in the library of the school for this, so I went to bookstores, local malls there in Dallas, and found books on the occult and witchcraft and all kinds of things, some of which referenced Anton LaVey and had chapters about him in there, and he kind of talked about that kind of thing, also as far as vampires and the occult aspects of it and all of that. So he was in this paper. I worked him in there and so forth. So and then subsequently I sort of took that kind of interest again into a more serious direction, which didn't last very long because I just got more involved in more broad-based kind of interests in all kinds of esoteric matters subsequently.
So you wrote about Anton LaVey in the high school newspaper?
In the high school, just my research paper for senior English. And actually, the teacher that I had, this is where synchronicity that's really wild, the teacher that I had, she said, did she notice this reference? Of course, she read this thing, and she said, this guy says, I had a student here whose parents were in this group.
Wow.
And, we're in this organization. I said, really? Well, and so, that was about it at that point. But then subsequently I discovered that these were the only people in Dallas at that time. And when I joined the organization, I got a letter, and part of the letter from the Black House, said, our local people in Dallas just moved. These were a married couple. I can't remember their first names, but they were the Pipkins.
Wow.
Yeah, their name was Pipkin, and their son was in the same school as I was previously, and actually had this same teacher.
Wow.
Yeah. And this guy, these Pipkins, Paul, I think it was Paul Pipkin, they wrote a article for the Cloven Hoof, which I subsequently acquired all of the back issues of the Cloven Hoof, hither and yon. And this guy actually wrote a article in there about the magic and story of O and all of that sort of thing, which would have been, it's a good thing I probably didn't meet him when I was in high school. But, that would have really been a little too much too soon probably. But anyway, there are certain synchronicities there that just continued.
Yeah, that's amazing how you make how you pass so near to certain people in your past.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually kind of like lead you towards other people. It's sort of this idea of like find the others, like Timothy Leary says, like find the others. Like you start to look at this, you start to look at that, and it starts to lead you to something else and to someone else, and all of a sudden you're on a path of some kind,
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. A lot of people, I think that's one of the downfalls or problems with our culture today is all of this digitalized experience whereby everything is happening in this not world of the here and now of knowing actual human beings or even coming into their sphere or environment. And I don't think that the special knowledge can pass through the computer. It's never been my experience.
So is that the power of oral tradition?
Oral tradition, or just being in the presence. Even I think just like Gurdjieff talks about being in contact with higher men, as he called it, right? Mm-hmm. And so earlier we were talking about you've got a new book that's going to come out soon, which I think might tie in with this. It's called Re-Tribalize Now. Mm-hmm.
So this kind of sounds along those lines of direct contact is an important, vital aspect of the human experience. Can you tell us a little about that?
Sure. That's exactly that sort of thing, the world of community and the necessity of, in the future, especially to return to the past models of our culture which have worked. And it worked in the past because it had to work. People could not survive and certainly not thrive in this world without a tribal support system. That's the only way they could possibly survive. And today we have governments and all kinds of structures, economic and so forth, structures which replace a lot of the physical necessities of our existence. But in that trade-off, there were also in the original social order, there were spiritual or psychological or other dimensions of human happiness and sense of solidarity and loyalty and identity that were tied up with tribal existence. And those things are certainly lost, and there's no reason why we have to permanently lose those things. We can regain them if we just will it so. No one is stops us, if we are wise and prudent about the way we go about it, from re-tribalizing and reconstructing these tribal cultures for ourselves. And one of the things that people often talk about tribal existence, and it's sort of semi-popular to talk about it, but one of the things that's always missing, or almost always missing, is the idea that there's really a proximity principle. People have to be close to one another. They have to have regular and easy contact with one another. They don't have to live in the same village or area. They could, but not necessarily. But they do have to be able to be in contact with one another to help each other out. Hey, my car broke down. Come on, I'll fix that. We'll help one another. We got to be able to make life easier for one another. That's what old tribes were. That's what new tribes can be. And that's the practical dimension that a lot of people, they have ideological constructs. Oh, we believe this. They're more like cults than they are really tribes. In a tribe, people, just because they were of the same background organically, linguistically, and every other way, they had the same cultic life, religion, if you will, worship the same gods, etc. But that was just a natural outcome of the circumstances of life. It's not, and within tribes, there was all kinds of spiritual diversity in ancient times as far as the kinds of gods that particular family or person might gravitate towards, because they were, in general, obviously polytheistic people. But today, even in those who espouse the idea of being polytheistic or being pagans or heathens or whatever you want to call it, they nevertheless are really oftentimes what I call crypto-Christians, in the sense that they have internalized this idea of orthodoxy, and that they will say, for example, in the world of Asatru, which I've been a part of for most of my life, someone will say about me or someone else, or somebody they don't like what they say, they'll say, oh, he's not real Asatru, right? And they're just like saying you're a heretic. But real pagan systems, we observe, if you go to India, where you see a Hinduism or a Shinto or whatever, they aren't constantly saying, oh, this guy is a heretic. Right there. There are no such litmus tests, dogmas, such as developed in the Christian church or in Islam or whatever. That's really a program and a edifice of these orthodoxies, the exact purpose of which is to cause individuals to get their minds with the program, and there is a program, whereas real paganism doesn't have that.
Right. So it seems to me that you don't really have heresy until you have centralized authority, until there's there's like a centralized structure that attempts to control language, culture, and behavior. Then you have heresy. You don't really have it before that.
Right. And there's the idea that everybody's going to be, it's like a linguistic fact, and it's also something I learned that was also true in the history of religion, that no two people have the same exact language. They can be American English speakers from the same town from Mississippi, wherever, but if a linguist analyzes it, they will pronounce things slightly differently. They have a different vocabulary. If you say, well, what's your lexicon that you've got stored in your brain? It's going to be different from family to family. There are family words, for example. Families will have words for objects that other families don't share, individuals. So that no two people have the same language. And no two people obviously have the same religion. I don't care how much you've been browbeaten by a church into believing a dogmatic set of principles. In your heart of hearts, you deviate from that. You can't help it. You wouldn't be human if you didn't. And so trying to enforce these orthodoxies are very much a program for unhappiness, for dysfunction, and all kinds of bad things. So if you accept the difference, true diversity, we hear this word, it just makes me sick when I hear it because I'm constantly diverse. But most of the people who use that word are not interested in actual diversity. They want orthodoxy. They just want external diversity, but internal, that is ideological, all kinds of other things, beliefs and thoughts and ideas, they don't want any diversity there. So it's quite, again, a program it's a program of command and control also. So we see it in politics, it's ideological type politics, and we see it in religion and such. But a lot of the stuff you see in politics today are just secularized versions of the medieval church, really.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, this is something that I've reflected on before. You know, our modern Western civilization likes to make a big deal about separation of church and state. But what's really happened is what's happened is the management and administration of orthodoxy has been transferred from church to state. So and since there's this idea that the state is all us, right? Which is not really true. Not really true, I don't think. I don't think that's really possible for an organization to be everyone and we all own it somehow. But everyone feels this obligation to try and control that and push their ideas and their agendas through it to be on the winning side of it. And so what you have is just a new centralized authority that pushes down a new orthodoxy that, and, you know, Dr. Aquino has made this point about like 1984. In 1984, where they reveal, what the big reveals in there is that you have to control people's like sexuality in some kind of way. Right, in order to create frustration and in order to be able to control the explosiveness that occurs amongst the civilization when they're oppressed and controlled in that kind of way. And clearly that's what the Catholic Church was doing for like thousands of years during medieval times. But now this authority has been transferred over to the government, so now the government is finding new ways to create the same sort of control and frustration with a new I guess a new orthodoxy about how we talk about things.
Absolutely, yeah. We see it everywhere, certainly in all religions, like we see with the Islamic radicals and that sort of thing. And a lot of the troubles we have with these mass shooters and other things like that, you see that there are people who are frustrated, a lot of times very much sexually frustrated by the dysfunction of our whole culture that way, and these are like aberrations that crop up in oppressive. We think of ourselves as so free. Oh, freedom! We are so free. We just no. There's many subtle forms of oppression that go on constantly in completely invisible ways, and they're invisible because people are in denial about it, that they are being oppressed. You know, I mean, there are certain things about, I'm oppressed, and then there's officially recognized and promoted forms of oppression, which are then translated into power. But when you scratch the surface, you say, well, people are being oppressed. Oftentimes it's self-oppression, in the sense it's their mechanism of will and desire and other things are crippled by the cultural circumstances, and they don't know how to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
So do you think that the transfer, did tribal culture, like willingly, like voluntarily transfer this authority to a centralized system, like via like what they talk about, like social contract? Was that a voluntary thing that happened, or was that something that was forcibly taken? Did a central authority come and?
Well, in ancient times, it was like, I gotta be. If I'm not in this system, I'm dead. I'm literally dead. I won't have food to eat. I won't have. Somebody will take me captive and sell me into slavery in a matter of moments or days. I need this system in order to survive. One of the old runic inscriptions has a curse formula on it about some that has a stone, and it's cursing anyone who would break this monument down and then destroy the stone setting that this stone was a part of. And the curse boils down to that the person will have what's called a wretched death. A wretch is somebody who's outcast from the tribe. And so they would be outcast. Anyone breaking this would be outcast and therefore die. So, that's just a fact of life back then. So people didn't say, well, I have all these choices, I could do this or I could do that. No, not really. Circumstances made it so that that was life. That's the way life was. So that's one of the profound differences between now and then, is that there would be this voluntourism, that there be a choice of joining, and then it becomes the obligation or the task of the tribal organization to make life better. And if the formula works by just simply applying it properly, and by that I mean not making it a cult, not making it a system of orthodoxy, making it primarily directed at practical aspects of life as it was in ancient times, and then leaving the individual free to make their own choices of conscience about what they believe and think, and what their even politics and so forth, or whatever it is. That's not that relevant. That we support one another. It's like a family. If we support one another, that's a fellow tribes person. We're going to help that guy out. We're going to be helped out by them, and it's just an understood network of solidarity and identity.
Yeah, people really naturally do this too. People really naturally do this in tribal systems or family systems. People will, naturally, just like voluntarily, like help out people that they relate to. Right,
if you're close by. Right. That's one of the things is like we get these people, these quote friends on Facebook or something. Oh yeah, it was like, for this friend lives in Ukraine. It's like all they can do is send you a little heart or send you a sad face or some such bullshit like that. You know what I mean? That's the extent of the way they can support you. No, that is not a tribe. That is not what it's about. It's what it's about now is what it was about then. And we're so addicted as a culture to these long distance, and this is nothing, even computers didn't start this. It was back many decades ago, it was just groups you joined by mail and got newsletters and things of that nature. So it's a difference of degree perhaps, but if kind, it's the same kind. And that's what tribalism seeks to go beyond that barrier, beyond that, say, you've got to get together with people, they've got to be close by, and you've got to focus on practical matters of life, not on ideology, religion, cult. The individuals can be diverse. So that would be the first step. Now, the idea that there are certain ideologies which probably lend themselves better to a healthy tribal life than others. For example, if you did have a bunch of hardcore Christians, if all of them aren't that way, they soon will be, because those hardcore Christian types who seek to enforce an orthodoxy will be constantly harping at the individuals in the community to submit to that system of thought. So having system of spiritual systems which do not require of your neighbors that they think like you do are probably a more healthy direction to go for a tribal existence, one that respects individual differences and respects and expects. Don't just say, well, I tolerate. I don't like the word tolerance. You tolerate a headache. You know, it's pain. That's so, I tolerate it. No, I respect it and expect it. You know.
Totally
I expect you to be different. I expect you to have different ideas. And I respect those, as long as they are respectable ideas, in the sense that I might say, well, it's not very well thought out, or we're a mistake, we can discuss it, whatever. But no matter how crazy I think it is, that's your thing. Now, for example, in my book, I point out, it's not written from, it gravitates towards examples from Celtic, Germanic, kind of tribal past, but talks about all kinds of people and examples of tribal systems that have worked and ones that haven't worked and why. Those that have worked, why are they successful, etc. But so that's, I point out there that these groups that interact badly with their neighbors because they are aggressive towards them, disrespectful towards them, like the Rajneeshis in Oregon, you know, bringing down disaster on their own heads unnecessarily because they were just so arrogant and so aggressive and all of that sort of thing. So you can see, well, that's a bad program as far as an attitude towards your host, because all tribes today would have to be in a larger political environment. So part of being successful is negotiating that. And I look at the tribe of what I'm talking about, what I'm trying to encourage, is to think of a tribe as a kind of a team. And in a team, like a football team, let's say, there are different roles there. They can't all be quarterbacks. They can't all be linemen. You need people who do a lot of different things in life, who have different talents, abilities, skills, and all sorts of things. And carpenters are just as important as teachers, and old folks are just as important as young ones, and so forth and so on. There's a role for everyone. That's what you see when we have throwaway people today in our world and culture. So you're useless now, economically useless. Yet, of course, the old folks are in the old folks' homes, rendered useless, yet families are paying thousands of dollars a month for child care. That's what those old folks were there for. That's what they were intended to be in a healthy tribal society. And you're throwing them away, and it's just sick. And that's what I always say. We are sick. We're a sick culture.
No, this is a big problem. Is that the centralized authoritarian power structures come in and try to separate all these functions. Like children have to be separated from their parents. They have to be dragooned into these public institutions for like 16 years of their lives, where they go and they get programmed. They learn to be obedient. They learn to be more effective, effective producers or whatever. And they're separated. They're taken out. That right there, the public school system prevents the evolution of our tribal systems right there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't learn just whatever in your group is, right? Whatever your
right.
people that live around you are.
Mm-hmm.
You're taken out of that at a very early age. And this is actually really new. People don't realize what a new innovation public school is. People think, we've all, all of us here, we're several generations have been brought up in this, so we just think it's normal. But it's actually a very new thing. And there's no way that that we can continue to develop like that. And then, like you said, old age, you're separated over there too. So, there's just no way to get back to it.
Right, but we have it in our control. That's what the thing is, that people say, oh, what can we do? Look how messed up things are. I feel so impotent. I feel so powerless in the face of these cultural problems. What can I do? I'll vote for this guy or that guy. No, Paul, that's ridiculous. You don't realize how you watch too much cable news and soon come to believe that's the real world, and other mad ideas like that. But this says you can take control of these things in your life, not alone, but in cooperation with others. But it's doable. You can get 50 families, let's say 50. They could be families, or they could be individuals, but you could get a really strong, functioning group together. And, of course, they would stay together and be together and work together only to the degree that the system works.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't be just like, oh, we're together, we're like in a witch coven or something, and we hang out and we do this, but, I don't like that guy did this and that, and I'm going home, I quit, I'm out, because I want to pool our skill resources, other things like that, and so that if it works, which it will work if you're close together, and you have a sense you've made some kind of formal commitment, and of course the missing component we haven't talked about at all here, and it sounds like, this is opening the door to a cult idea, and to a degree you could say that it is, but it's not a cult external to the tribe itself. It is something, it's a group myth about who we are, why we are, and why it is good that we are this way. And that we are good, we are together, we are, and we're special people. I have a thing in there, not calculated, but for sure upset some of my type readers, these alt-right types. I have a thing about, in there about the secret of the Jewish people. People, these people, they do it. And so these people are successful. They are tribal, and they have been for millennia. And part of the myth is we are one people. It's not true, of course, but, we are one people. We are special people, and we are smarter than the average bear, and we can do it, and we can succeed, and it is based on learning and intellectual performance, not on being a football player or some kind of nonsense and counterproductive nonsense like that, but study hard. And that's not just the Jewish people, but Indians, Chinese, they all follow this same tribal kind of motivation that we're special, we're separate, and that gives identity, solidarity, and that kind of thing. You just can't. It's focused towards a practical end. It is a magical ideology. In other words, like I've known Jewish people much of my life, was married to a Jewish woman for 17 years and so forth, and saw their family and how it all worked and who they were really and what they thought they were. You know, as far as the myths, it was a constant thing about myths in the family of saying, oh, we were like an illegitimate, we were related to the Romanovs. They're from Russia, you know. So it would be like, we're really royal people, you know. And that tells you, like, we're poor. What are you really? You're poor, downtrodden immigrants, you know, from Eastern Europe out of some shtetl somewhere. But they instilled in their children, even though Mama can't even speak English, pretty soon, when maybe the next generation are up for a Nobel Prize, you see?
Right. Yeah.
Because that myth, that belief that we can succeed, we are special, we are different, and of course sometimes that engenders what I think, whether it's again all these Indian kids that learn when the spelling bee, and people, oh, those people, and they the jealousy and envy draws ire from other people. But I always say, look at these; they are doing it on their own. It is achievement. It is, and they've mastered the idea of harnessing myth and harnessing the idea of myth in a collective way, not just an individual might approach it, develop a magical persona about how their divine self is this, that, the other thing. Now, what the tribal thing does is take it just one step further in sort of this hyper body from the individual to a group that will then have its mythology, and if it has to be put into the crucible. That's the proximity factor. It can't be allowed to be too diffuse all over the world or all over the country or whatever. It has to be sort of bound in this space so that these elements can interact productively. And then you got something bubbling. You got something cooking at that point.
Yeah.
See?
Yeah.
So this book, leadership, I am not a person who can lead such a thing. I've tried it. I can't do it. So this requires special people, but my plan with this book is put this idea out there. Maybe a good leader is not somebody who can come up even with these ideas, can realize, but can implement them. Again, that team idea. And a person who is a good leader will be somebody that has this character, that they're interested in other people. And that's one of my problems, is I just am doing my own thing, and, you know, I'm not, like, want to meddle, you know, with your personal process, right?
Right.
I don't want to, like, could be a bad example, like people in, like, Wiccan covens where, well, they work, or sometimes they work, and how do they work and why? Well, you got this queen bee priestess who meddles in every dimension of every one of these 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people's lives. They live for that stuff, right? Constantly in the soap opera of the coven. And they're just messing with it all the time. They get them involved in the drama of this little group, which goes nowhere and does nothing other than hangs out together and gets involved in each other's drama. But that's the person who's leading it, somebody who's interested in all of their little things in life. And so I'm not that way, and I don't think a good leader would be interested in, but in people's lives and in helping them and all of that and getting real joy out of that, but not someone who's going to meddle in their life. More like a good parent, right? Where you're not going to just micromanage your kid's life and tell them what to do and what they're supposed to study and so forth and so on, but to be interested and support their endeavors, whatever they might be, and guide them with basic principles and so forth. But you do have to really be interested in what's going on. Just like a good parent, even if he had 10 kids, he would be interested in all of their lives and be interested in helping all of them.
You know, it seems like someone like this is that you're talking about the kind of person, the kind of leader who arises out of the necessity of circumstance versus the kind of person that comes in, hey, I'm a professional leader. I'm really good at this. Why don't you all let me lead you? You know, which it immediately, you know, inspires mistrust from smart people, but people who arise because of the situation. So I have this. I'll give you an example of a situation that I've been through recently. So I bought a townhouse here in Houston a while back, and we had like a really informal like HOA group, you know, and there's like 12 different townhouses. So there's like an HOA fee, and we have to use this money for stuff, and there was this big controversy about fixing the gates. Like no one wanted to mess with this. No one wanted to do it independently. But eventually what we did is we negotiated. We got everyone together like talking about it. And because we all have a common interest, you know, and there's all kinds of different people that live here, right? Different age groups, different races, you know, and everything, different religions. Obviously, I'm a different religion than a lot of other people here. But, you know, what we all have a common interest in the property, right? Because we all own property right next to each other. We all want the property to be safe, to be valuable, to be, you know, to have integrity and stuff. And those common values brought us together to be able to make a decision about what we would do with this. And it actually harkens back to me something that you had said a long time ago, and this is when you were giving talks at Smithville one time when I came out there to Smithville. And you were talking about how the founding fathers, when they came up with the idea of voting, that the idea that like if you own property, anyone who owns property is always going to vote in the best interest. They're always going to make decisions in the best interest of that property and that community there because they're a part of it. And they're always going to support other people. They're going to want other people in that community who are own property, or you say connected to the land in some way, you know, depending on the tribal situation. They're connected with it in some way. They're a part of it. They're going to cooperate and make the best decisions that way too. So again, it brings everything back. In my mind, it sounds like this model that you're talking about brings everything back to geographic proximity. We have connections of common values and common interest in these things. Safety, you know. John Locke says life, liberty, property, right? It's like that land is like that's like a vital piece of it.
Right, and everyone succeeds. You have a vested interest in the success of your fellow tribes people, as opposed to this world we live in where it's, you know, war, every man against all the others, right?
Yeah. And
that atomization of people, isolated and alienated from one's environment, neighbors, people around, and all of that, and how that plays into the tyrannical program that if you feel unconnected to your fellow citizen, fellow man around you, then you'll be more easily manipulated because, after all, we should, on a deep level, have a fear at that point that we are somehow vulnerable and alone.
Well, this
and
is
only
right.
Big Brother can help us.
Right. No, exactly. That's the situation that you see in the big, you know, metropolis areas now, where people live in really big cities. Everyone rents, and that's a cool thing to do. But no one like really trusts anyone. Like a person like, you know, renting across from you down the hall, they could be a killer. They could be, you know, they could be, you know, Jeffrey Dahmer. And no one really trusts each other. And the only thing that ever unites people is when you know, some kind of like central authority comes in and says, oh, we're all united because we are We live in this city, or we're all united because we're this party, Big Brother.
Right. Or as we see, like with the hurricanes or whatever, that disaster, which could be in the ancient times, is like the Huns are invading or something, or natural disaster, whatever, something is that threatens the community's existence, then something kicks in. That the trick is to get that spirit to kick in without a crisis.
Yeah.
So that crises are avoided in the future.
Right. No, that's absolutely, you really touched on something there, because who was it? There's some political figure recently said, never let a good crisis go to waste.
Yep. Rahm Emanuel there.
Yes, exactly. That's it, Rahm Emanuel. It's like every time there's a huge crisis like that, well, you know now what's going to happen. They're going to use this as an excuse to, we need to increase the police force locally. We need to militarize the police force a little bit more, or maybe we need to have a little bit more control over social media so we know what people are talking about, or we need to detain people at airports for longer. And this is all for your own good. So because, we had a crisis.
Yeah, it's like the 9/11 thing. Okay, there's a bad thing happened there. That's true. But the immediate slogan that emerged the very next day is, the world is different now. Everything has changed. Well, the Germans blitzed London on a nightly basis, bombing it constantly. It's like, and the attitude was, get underground, go back to work the next day. Nothing's changing. We're just nose to the grindstone, whatever. Sure, it's a difficult challenge, but it's not like, the world has changed because look at what's happening. I'm just freaking out. Everything's got to change. No. That's just giving in to the very thing you say you're fighting.
Yeah.
It should have been, okay, you got to bomb these buildings. Is that all you got? You know? Yeah. Well, so the attitude, but that's people taking advantage, not letting the crisis go to waste because there's an agenda waiting. You can either cause it. That's what these conspiracy theories, of course, going back to the Reichstag fire and all that sort of thing, because that was like a textbook case where you say, this thing was either caused by or guided by the forces of the Nazis caused it or had it happen, and then immediately, this was just in a matter of weeks and months, theoretically that state, the German state, went from a parliamentarian system of the Weimar Republic to a National Socialist state in just a matter of a few months. Total transformation. And all key to that one event where nobody was even hurt. It's like, of course, there you see that the people had to be conditioned in a crisis kind of modality from a very complex, circumstance as far as who is being manipulated. At that point, say, well, that's what we can manipulate these people by pushing these buttons, this populace, this body politic, whereas the United States would be much more difficult to manipulate. So that you see that educating the people badly for a long enough period of time, destroying their sense of history and rootedness and whatever values they might have politically, historically, and other things is a long-term project. Whereas in Weimar, Germany, it was like a boiling kettle already, All you got to do is kick it over. It's already completely chaotic. So
I've heard a similar thing about Rome when in ancient Rome, when it went from being a republic to an empire, and it was based on when they were raided. There was some pirates that raided like the port, and they set fire to it, and it wasn't that big of a deal, but it freaked out the citizenry so much that they were like, oh no, we got to give Caesar like total power over this, and that was it, and that's it right there. They used that crisis excuse to just totally consolidate centralized power over everything, and that was the empire. And then from there, they ran on they ran off that steam for a while, but then eventually, lose steam inevitably.
Yeah, they maintained their fiction that it was a republic even in the imperial times. It wasn't right. It's like their motto of the Senate and people of Rome, the SPQR motto, or that thing which is a symbol of Rome, Senatus Populusque Romanus, remains this kind of. But that's true. Like if you look at the Constitution of the Soviet Union, if you read it, you say this looks just like the American Constitution. It's not what's on paper. It's not what's the official thing, but the culture and other factors that make you can take this and say, well, that's just a fiction, and this is the way it really works. And so that it's well, like a lot of things that people say about what's going on in our country today. Certain changes were made in the Constitution. For example, when you remove when you start to elect the senators directly, that's like a real downfall in the republic, because the states no longer have representation in the federal government as states. They are now it's just another higher, different House of Representatives. That's all. It's just like we have two houses of representatives. They're both democratically elected. Originally, it was only your own representatives. That was your voice in the federal government. The state had its voice in the form of the senators, and the senators were elder people, statespeople. They were supposed to be former great people of the state, right? And you look at these senators we have now, so these are just, they're nobody. They're just, I ran for Senate instead of the other office, but, like special qualities or types of qualifications or background or anything. It's just another, and when they changed that fundamentally changed the way that we do things, as well as property. The allowing of property tax is another cosmological step away from a real functioning republic, because again, we have this, people don't own a part of the state, of the land, of the country, and so really have to pay tribute to the government in order to keep their land or their property. Yeah. So they have to pay tribute, and they don't own it the way that a monarch owned the land of his, like England. The King of England owns England. All the people, you don't buy land there, you lease it for a long period of time. But the monarch owns it. And so the idea we had was that the people, it wasn't just us, I mean, that's why they went back to Anglo-Saxon law, limiting the power of kings, and that the king really ruled by the consent of the nobility, of the tribal leaders who elected the king. And he didn't rule just because I'm the oldest son of the last king and God ordains and all that kind of stuff. That's just a program for disaster, which played out many times in history, of promoting completely unqualified people into power. Whereas in the tribal, ancient Anglo-Saxon tribal circumstance, the nobility elected the king, and they elected the kind of king that was right for the time. They needed a war leader, they elected a warrior, and if they needed somebody who's just going to sit there and say, fine, whatever you say, because everything's running well and everybody's doing their thing, and we don't need somebody to meddle in our affairs. We just have a figurehead, basically. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that they need that. So the kind of things that we think of as a kind of ideal circumstance today, they already had that in ancient times. But not all peoples have that, of course. I mean, that was just peculiar to the Anglo-Saxons, and of course we have other examples in the Germanic world where we see functioning republics, like in Iceland and on Gotland, the island of Gotland, that were republics. And so that the local people sent representatives to a parliament and all this stuff, and goes back to pagan times. So but it was an empowering of locality, of local peoples.
Right. And also Ireland, under the Tuat system, this is with Tuats, or local tribal chieftains, up through like the 10th century. Murray Rothbard writes about this, how it was basically, that is how Ireland was not conquered by England. For like thousands of years, England was trying to conquer them through all of this time period, but they couldn't do it because they'd make a deal with one tribal, one Tuat chieftain, and the other Tuat chieftains will be like, well, I didn't agree to that. So if England came over, they were going to get conflict. And it was only after Ireland, after the 10th century, I can't remember when exactly, they finally centralized under a king. Well, that was it. Then the British could come in, find that king, and take control that way, because once you have a centralized authority like that, it goes down to the whole infrastructure. It affects the whole infrastructure of things, and actually makes the people more vulnerable to an attack.
Right. It makes them a whole lot more vulnerable. But those systems, just like in Scotland, which is Scotland, of course, is just an extension of Ireland. But that's with the clan system and such, that's why Scotland was so hard to conquer. I mean, if you look at ancient history, what happened on the British Isles is that the Romans came in and conquered that part that we think of as England today, and were there for 400 years, administering it and wrecking, the local politics, of course, and installing a Roman system. And then around 400, the Romans pull out, just leave the territory entirely, because they can't hold up under the invasions from the north, from the Germans. And so they just pull out of Britain altogether. And that's when the Anglo-Saxons move into Britain. But where do they conquer? Well, what part of the island do they conquer? Well, they conquer only the part of it, not for want of trying elsewhere, but that was formerly the Roman part, because this culture had been destroyed there. There was no, they couldn't stand up against an invader, an organized invader, so they fell. And that's how England comes to be. And why? Then they say, well, now we're going to move into what's in Wales. Those guys are, there's more trouble than it's worth to conquer them, or to go too far north. Again, those guys get crazy up there, and we're just going to stop here. Go to the same place where the Romans stopped.
Yeah.
But the English tried to invade Scotland, and did so successfully over the years, but would never completely subdued or pacified them.
So
and even now. Yep.
So a recurring theme that I'm hearing, and a lot of things that you're talking about here, especially in getting back to a more tribalistic culture, is you talk about the need for voluntarism and the ability of individuals to make voluntary decisions about their lives, and to make a conceptual jump here. This is something I've also heard you talk about in relation to the Mazdan idea of the Fravashi, that the nature, which indicates that the nature of the soul is essentially voluntary, like the name, like the term Fravashi means those who have chosen, right? Something like that. So can you talk a little bit about that, how that works into it? Do you think that there's a metaphysical basis for why human beings have this natural inclination to want to be free and voluntary?
Yeah, well, that's the when a person confronts or realizes or allows themselves to experience their individual soul, what the ancient Greeks would have called the daimon, but the Germanic peoples might call it philia or something of that nature, and the Iranian people called it Fravashi, is this divine part of ourselves, which is our highest form of being within our individuality, and that thing is the sort of seat of our religious life, in the sense that that's what we seek to actualize. And so this is not unique to the Indo-European people at all. You go to Japan, see the kami, which means God, goddess, divine being, but also each person has a kami, and so people who fulfill their kami nature and completely enter into it become like gods or goddesses. And those people may be a sword maker here, or a priest, or this or that, all kinds of different ways that they manifest these, because they are individuals. And all of these divine beings begin as individuals and are never going to be melded into a melting pot of souls and lose their individuality. They are pre-existing individuals, and so that's who we are. And so we have chosen, those Fravasis, going back to the Iranian one, which tells the most sort of profound story about this concept, that those volunteered to come and fight for the good in a world where they would find opposition, and in a world where that being would not be any more than Ahura Mazda, the highest form of divinity, is not omnipotent, can suffer defeat, setback, can be injured, can be hurt, is vulnerable, because in a battle, in a fight, it's not a ordained that you will win every battle in this war. And so people, humans, individuals, all of them that we know and all of them who we are all injured, wounded warriors. And those wounds manifest themselves in our dysfunctions, our personality problems, are all of the things that are wrong with us, that are where we are less than perfect, are the result of injuries incurred in this battle. But the point of voluntarism, the idea that we are here by our own volition, and that's the importance of myth to mental health in this regard. We talked about myth as a magical concept earlier, and here's another one, that if you believe, accept victimology, I didn't ask to be born, why am I here? I can't stand this, blah, 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 blah. That no, this myth says you came here of your own volition. You are here because you volunteered to be here. Now, if you start with that assumption and you instill that in people, which would say, well, that's probably most logical. If we are spiritual beings, if we have a divine nature, if we have a spark of the divine, like the German mystics, like Meister Eckhart, the Funklein, the spark of the divine, which are all heresies, and would get you burned at the stake if you taught them and you weren't well connected enough. these things are anti-dogma of Christianity, but people believe them because they seem to be true. They ring true, that idea. And that is the same thing as whether it's the Fravashi or the kami nature or the Synchronicity or whatever, that there is a spark of the divine in us all individually. And it doesn't make us perfect, but it is the goal of perfection toward which each of our beings strive. And with that myth, we are then endowed with power, with potency. We're not rendered impotent victims of Adam's misjudgment or whatever, or of any other kind of victimhood that one wants to imagine or project. But rather, at that point, you realize, I'm here of my own volition, and so I have the power to do something great, good, and successful, and I'm empowered to do so, and so I'm already halfway there. If I believe I can do it, then I'm halfway towards actualizing that. But if we are told that you are a damned sinner, you are no good. If you do good, it's only because God lets you do good. That is the orthodox, or causes you to do good. It's God's doing, not your doing. If you said, I did good because I am good, that's heresy. That's against Augustinian doctrine of original sin. You were the product of original sin, therefore you were a damned sinner. That can only be saved by God's grace, which means God's gift, free gift of salvation to you. You are impotent and passive in this whole process. And so it is an anti-human program or dogma, because it disempowers humanity.
So if you decided to come here, if you can say to anyone, you decided to come here, I can say, I decided to come here, that means that you have personal responsibility for being here. You're responsible for your existence here. And that's one of the fundamental left-hand path ideas, It's like responsibility or responsible. That's one of the 9 satanic statements. It's one of the most basic ideas.
Mm-hmm. So, and it's the beginning of a good life and happiness, which of course, going back to the Muslim thing, it is the goal. That is a goal, if not, the main goal. If you're happy, you're fighting the lie, the grudge, and you are injuring your opponent, the divas and so forth, more effectively than in any other way. Is to gain happiness, individual happiness. That is success. That is, whereas again, he looks to Christians, they say, oh no, we're here as a veil of tears. We're here to suffer and to be put on. It's awful. And if we just are obedient and bear our suffering in a grim way and white-knuckle it through life, then we'll be rewarded later. That's just like a, secularized Soviet Union. Why would the Soviet Union, the people in the Soviet Union, live that dreary, horrible life for those 70 years? Oh, we're doing it for the future generations when Earth will be paradise. What? You're telling me I'm just going to die and go away? I will reap none of these rewards. I'm just going to suffer now. You're not even giving me paradise in the afterlife because you deny that exists. That is crazy. Wow. Well, if you don't believe it, I will kill you. I'll go with that then. Maybe I'll at least get to drink some vodka tonight.
Right. Or we send you to Gulag.
Make it even worse. You think factory is bad? Wait till you see Gulag.
You work for Soviet states, for Soviet Superman.
That's pretty crazy.
So what do you think? So do you think the fundamental nature of man is good?
Oh yes. Mm-hmm. But we're wounded warriors. I mean, we're here, but and some people, they just, like you wouldn't say, well, like this, here we have a platoon of Marines, and they went through, they fought on at Iwo Jima or whatever, this guy said, well, they don't look like warriors to me. Half of them have their legs blown off and whatnot. So they don't look like such good warriors to me. They can't even walk. This is, well, that's because they were, the battle is tough. Mm-hmm. And when you're exposing yourself to harsh conditions as a part of your duty, then you will inevitably sustain wounds,
Yeah.
And some are stronger than others, But, on the contrary, I cannot shake the idea, because it's, of course, part of the Germanic thing, an Indo-European thing in general. Generally, Muslims, for the most part, are Zoroastrians, Orthodox Zoroastrians, for whatever reason, don't promote, believe, or have as a part of the official religion the idea of reincarnation. But I'm pretty well convinced that that's got to be part of the whole system, the way it works.
So for me, when digging to that level, where I can say, my fundamental nature is good, and that's the fundamental nature of people, and that good has to do with fighting against anti-voluntarism, anti-individuality,
coercion and oppression.
Coercion, exactly. That lays it all out, that the fundamental sin, the only real sin, is coercion. And once you realize that, it's like all of the other problems about right or wrong, everything falls into place. And I think it's an important thing for people to understand now, because so much of the left-hand path is kind of being taken over by moral relativism and postmodernism and all these things that say, well, everything's just relative and everything is whatever. But the problem with that is then people come into the world and they're like, oh, well, I'm whatever, this and that, and nothing really matters, and they're just kind of suspended that way. And it makes them, in one sense, it can make them dangerous, because why not use coercion onto other people? That's you start moving into this one. This theory about how to make it through life is, well, you got to use some coercion on people. You got to use a little coercion on people. We got to fight. The government has to take our money so they can go kill people that I don't know in other countries, and
collect our taxes.
Right, exactly.
Confiscate our wealth, for this purpose at the point of a gun.
Yeah. So I think it makes us vulnerable. It makes people vulnerable, and to me, the left-hand path always represented, when I came in contact with it, it represented taking responsibility. I mean, that was one of the things that I read the Satanic Bible when I was 13 years old or whatever. That was like, wow, that's heavy. That's deep. No one in all the churches that I've been to ever said anything about that. And nothing in any of the occult books and Wicca books I'd read said anything about that. It said something really empowering, and it also said, that I was okay, right? It said there wasn't anything fundamentally wrong with me because I want things for myself, and I want to, be successful, or I want to, do this or that. And so I thought that was really empowering. That's kind of like the essential aspect of it. And I feel that you really hit on all of these things in your book, Lords of the Left-Hand Path, which I have to talk about for just a second, because I think it's such an important book for the movement. Self-Deification, Individualism, Initiation, which means working towards completion, and Magic, which means that we have will and that we can change things and we're here for some kind of purpose. All of this, to me, sounds like, this all sounds like the Frabashi to me. When I encounter that, there's no, I don't see any conflict with it at all. It's like you're talking about the same thing.
Right. Yeah. Right. That's the thing about the where you see these old ancient systems that see it a divine part of the individual human being, then sees little gods and goddesses in people. So, and that is what this, for example, in the Muslim thing or the Germanic thing, it encourages heroism, right? That people can be heroes, that they should aspire and be motivated towards a heroic life. And that's good. That means that good things will be done, and that happiness will be achieved more readily, because people who do things that are meaningful with their lives are going to be happier than those who wallow in meaninglessness.
Absolutely. So one of my Twitter followers, Scotati, wanted me to ask you a question. Can you talk a little bit about the Polarian method? What is it?
Yes.
How has it been used? How can people benefit from it?
Well, it's one of the essential patterns that I've used in my life, and that comes about through exposure to scholarly methodology. Because I started off life with my dabbling in the stuff when I was in high school, and subsequently I would be a regular old occultozoid nincompoop, waiting for the comet Cahutek to show up or whatever kind of nonsense. And then I was exposed to the academic world. I was going to college, but that doesn't mean crap. You can still be a nincompoop, as we all know. But I got interests in the Germanic tradition and culture and all of that, and then was exposed to great men like Edgar Polme in this regard. And so this is the intellectual aspect of analysis and learning and gaining the tools that you need, languages and all of the hard work that goes into that part of life and of your interest is one pole of things. It's saying, I wrote something recently on a Facebook post, got a lot of people up in arms about the power, the false power of holding weird beliefs, of holding wacky beliefs. The more wacky the belief you hold, the more energized you get. Just like you're listening to Art Bell and crazy shit. Oh man, it's just like you're just making yourself anxious, unhappy. But let me find something really bizarre to believe and just embrace that. Embrace the hell out of it. And I'm just getting all excited over that. That is wrong. The Polarian method is your antidote to that kind of nincompoopery. And that is, let's look at reality. Let's delve deeply into the intellectual, logical, rational side of things. And in a sense, we are replicating what Plato was talking about, that you need to train your mind in the objective, in dianoia for a long time, and then release this kind of skills and these constructs that you have developed, these abilities you have acquired, onto more subtle things, and in so doing, you will get things out of it that no occultozoid nincompoop could ever get out of it. As far as reality and getting real results, not just getting yourself, like using it like it's some kind of a meth addict or something, just getting you excited, just getting you bouncing off the walls about UFOs and this, that, and the other thing, but rather how to come to something at the end that your product, which is your own soul, your own mind, your own being, that's what the idea of the Rune Guild, for example, or other initiatory organizations. You see that a guild might have, well, we're going to, we're a shoemaker guild, so we're going to make really fine shoes here. Well, a university originally or an initiatory school, your product is yourself. And so you have to use this kind of a method, which has the pole of inspiration and insight and all of those kinds of things where you're going to go in that direction, but you've got to be balanced in this polar model with the objective, with the logical, rational. And that's what I see. A lot of people nowadays seem to be more than ever enthusiastically fleeing logic and reason. You know, in politics and all kinds of things, people are just uninterested in being reasonable. And the Polarian method is the balanced development of logical and reasonable data with inspiration. And not allowing either one to dominate the other and becoming overblown with inspiration so that you throw caution to the wind, but at the same time harnessing your inspiration and not trying to limit its power, but trying to direct and harness its power to a positive end.
So something kind of emerges, like from the interplay of these two extremes. Is that something like the force of Runa?
Yeah, well, sure, yeah. That's well, Runa lies at the root of the process before that process even starts, where you say, there is something there that I want to discover. There's something hidden about myself, about the world, about everything. Everything I encounter, there is something unknown about it. Therefore, I am called upon to discover it as best I can. These things in the Polarian method are my sets of in my toolbox. It's like an archaeologist might have, some measuring sticks and a spade and all the little tools that the guy might need to go about the business of discovering things and realizing what they mean. But so you have tools, and the Polarian method is a method which helps us acquire a better product of ourselves, a better initiatory process. And we see this is not unique. I gave it a name that makes it, something that gives it more a memorable nature rather than just sort of having these methods and not really giving it a kind of an interesting name. But I think other people have done it, but in philosophical and initiatory systems, I think certainly Dr. Clino is an example of that. I mean, no one is more inspired and comes up with things through inspiration more than him, yet at the same time, few of us know anyone who is more disciplined in his intellect and mind than him either. So he sort of exemplifies it. I just gave it a peculiar name of my own, based on this idea of Odin being this polarized entity stretched between Asgard and hell, between life and death, between all polarities. You see, and if you look at the Germanic cosmology, it's just a complete system of polar opposites. You know, between fire and ice, between the Vanir and the Jötuns, and between the dark elves and the light elves, and this. I just pull everywhere. The whole cosmos is a series of polarities. They synthesized here in the center in Midgard. So that's the origin of it.
So you mentioned, so we're talking about Runa here. I believe in 1974 is when you first heard the word Runa. Can you talk a little bit about how that happened and what that was like?
Yeah, well, like I said, I was an occultazoid nincompoop, and I was hanging around with people that, you know, occult-type people. It was in the air, of course, in those days, but at the same time, it wasn't all that popular. There wasn't that many institutions, places to go. So like in Austin, Texas, there was a thing called the Nexalist Collegium. They taught all kinds of esoteric, occult kind of courses. It was dominated by Wiccans, or the guy who was a Wiccan character, and all of that. And so we went once to a like a psychic fair up in Dallas, and there was this guy there named Norbu Chin. He was a Tibetan monk, you see, but not really. But anyway, he did stage magic, which we were too young and dumb to realize. And, you know, he would do things like great Tibetan spiritual exercises, such as passing a giant needle through a balloon, and other great spiritual things like that. And so this one person in our sort of group became obsessed with him, sort of, and so I've been in dream contact with this character, okay? And so I'm going to go. I found out where he lives, so we're going to go visit him. I'm going to go, and he'll recognize me. You know, he'll know who I am, because we've been, you know, doing God knows what in our dreams for the past 3 weeks. And so we got in the car and drove to a place near Huntsville, south of there, kind of near Houston, really, more near Houston. And we were out in an oil field, man. It was like, you know, those things you see them, or those burn-off pipes or whatever. They were all over the place there. And it was just kind of a desolate place. And we went to this trailer there, and she goes up to the door and comes out, and this guy comes out, but he doesn't look like he did at the psychic fair, that's for sure. He's just like wearing a T-shirt and, you know, drinking a beer or whatever. I just see him, you know, pointing and waving his arms and, you know, telling her to get away, obviously. And so she comes back to the car, sits down, and says, "He's not ready to talk to me yet." So we drive off, back to Austin, and so we're kind of, you know, so it was the summertime, hot, no air conditioning in the car. It's 1974. It was a quiet trip home, you see, because nobody wanted to say anything, and so I'm just sitting in the back seat, just kind of dozing. And but you know, it's just kind of very much tension and all that, and so I'm just kind of dozing, and just boom, just in my ear, you know, this word just says Runa. What's that? And I kind of knew what it was referring to, but not exactly. And so so this has something to do with runes and Germanic runes and things like that I'd heard about, and so I went to the University of Texas Library, I was a student there then, and I went and I looked up the card catalog, looked for all this stuff on runes, which I was fairly competent in German at that time, so I could get German books and everything. And I got this whole big stack of books on runes and started reading about them. And one of the books in there was Karl Spiesberger's book, Runenmagie. It was, you know, a practical manual of rune magic in the Armaning tradition that he wrote in 1955. And so I just started studying about it. Oh my gosh, look at this stuff, you know, scholarly stuff, magical stuff, all kinds of things. And so, but that word I heard, and then it was like, that is a word. And I was like, for the rest of my life, I've been trying to unpack that word and that experience and that whole, what does it mean? And that's where it started immediately. Like the next day I started, and I've been going ever since. But it was kind of like a parts fall thing there, in the sense that you're off on a wild goose chase. It's like a fool's errand. But, you know, I went along for the ride. I didn't say this is ridiculous or nonsense or just I think I'll stay home. I wish I might have wanted to, but I went along for the adventure, and it was nothing to, except I wouldn't have had that exact experience if I hadn't gone on that wild goose chase. So part of the Runa message overall also is you got to get out, you know, you got to be willing to do some things maybe that are risky, silly, foolish, perhaps, in order to have the experience that you need to have. And that was something I was always doing or ready to do, that sort of a romantic part of me. You know, I'm not very careful. I wasn't as a young person, you know. Sometimes I did things I shouldn't have done, you know. I mean, talking about fighting against communism, where I, you know, went to Hungary and, you know, did like dangerous missions and things like that, trying to help people get out of Hungary. But I had no business doing that kind of stuff, and almost got myself in big trouble there.
Wow.
You know, this is back when I was 18 years old. And you know,
was this through the military or some?
No. I was in a German language school and met this guy who was a Hungarian guy who escaped, and there were people there who were trying to escape, but you know, were idiots sometimes. Like this one guy that I was trying to help, he would say, "Okay, I'm going to got my plan, you know, how to get out of the country," and then he would do things like give himself a going away party.
Well, they're Hungarian.
But then the police would say, okay, we're going to, you know what to do with this guy. You know, he's going to be skedaddling tomorrow morning somewhere, and we'll just nab him. So, but anyway.
And this is while Hungary's under communism.
Yeah, this is 1970. It's 1971. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it was like I went, you know, you had to get a visa, go to Vienna, get a visa, you know, and then wait, and okay, here you can go. And I went in, and without asking that, I'm sure there was something in there about where I wasn't supposed to go or what I was allowed to do, but I didn't even look at that. I was supposed to go to this town down south, the southern part of Hungary, and Sexard is the name of the town, south of Budapest. And so I went down there, and there's where these people were, these friends of this guy, and hung out with them for a while and gave them the messages they needed to get. And then they gave me their return message and all. And I was hanging out there about the second day or so, middle of the night or very early in the morning. You know, banging comes at the door of this guy's parents' apartment where I was staying, and it's like the police, with their whole, that kind of, with their whole red stars and big giant, all that kind of stuff. When they take me down to the police station, which is like this giant building with this giant red star on top of it, and they take me in there and interrogate me. The guy told me, so they won't use rubber hoses or anything like that on Americans, so don't worry too much about it. So, okay. And so I'll go. And so, none of that happened. They just told me, you're not supposed to be here. You're not even allowed to be in this town, So get out, and you have how many ever hours it was to get out of Hungary.
Uh-huh.
And so I get on the train and woo, head out, go up to Budapest, and in those days the Hungarian trains are still steam engines. Mm-hmm. So when you got to the Austrian border, Austria, of course, like the rest of Europe, had electric trains. So it was a big deal to change the engines and that sort of thing. So the train sits there in Hungary, sits on the tracks while they're changing this engine. So it sits there for several minutes, 30 minutes or so. And, in Europe, you have the blow a whistle. It's like that means we're just about to take off. And so I heard the whistle, and I thought, man, I made it, because I had this stuff stuffed in my pants and all that. And so I'm free. I got it. I made it. And so then the door opens to the compartment. This big, giant policeman says, Stefan Flowers, kommen Sie mit mir. He doesn't speak German. And so he takes me off the train to this little building off to the side. And the train that I was supposed to be on pulls off into the darkness, going off into Austria.
Mm-hmm.
And there I am.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm in this room, and there's all these guys with machine guns and shit. And, I'm thinking, oh, man.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, they talk to me, they say this, they say that. They asked me what was I doing there. I'm just saying I'm visiting friends. I met this guy, and he said, go visit my parents. I just, that's it. They said, did they give you anything? Or you carry anything? And I said, no. And they didn't search me like you said they wouldn't. They just kind of looked through my bags and stuff like that. And so they gave me kept me there for a while. Then they said, okay, there's this little, an engine with one car on it. It's going to take me back, take me over to Austria. And so I go in there and say, okay, go in there. And so then I'm sitting in this car at the back of it, the very back of it, just an open car. And there I am. Okay, waiting. When is this thing going to leave, And through the door up front of this car, the door opens and a little man comes out. And he's wearing like a lederhose, a little hat, and all this. He's like dressed up like an Austrian gnome. Okay. And he sits down at the other end of the car and starts talking to me in German. And, it's like, oh, well, what were you doing there? I bet you, he's trying to make me believe that he's an Austrian guy, I see, because I look at me, I say I'm dressed like an Austrian. And so he said, oh, I bet you really put one over on, did you? And I said, oh, I thought I had something, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, did you have anything? I bet you really got it, right? You really, showed them. I bet you really tricked them, didn't you? No, I don't have any. It's like, I don't have anything. I don't know what you're talking about. And so he said, oh, okay. And so that was their last effort,
Wow.
And so then I was sitting in that car, and I see the guy jump out of the engine up front and, skedaddle over to that guardhouse over there where I was interrogated. And the train pulls off, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
But
wow.
It's like, well, for an 18-year-old kid just out of high school, and that kind of a thing, it was pretty
No, that's amazing.
Part.
I mean, you experienced communism and collectivism and the state under that, like firsthand, And
yeah, when we were coming in to Hungary, this is kind of the way things were then, where train was just coming into Hungary, and there were like Hungarian or maybe they were Russian, who knows, tanks and other things like turning donuts, and the military guys were standing up and pointing their guns at the train, just kind of like they were like doing some kind of maneuvers, but it was obviously to intimidate. These were all tourists or something coming from the west into the east, and that was like their greeting party,
Wow.
But one thing this guy told me, he said, only the most stupid people in our country, become policemen and become like, operatives of the party and that sort of thing. He said, so for that reason, oftentimes, we can get away with a lot more than we would otherwise just because they're not too smart.
Yeah.
They're just go along. That their whole pathway to power is obedience, and convincing those above them that they are more obedient than the other guy in class. So they get rewarded for that.
Right. That's what people don't understand, is that mass collectivism like that, it always leads to more incompetence. And it should be obvious. It should be obvious. I mean, just, you or I could go into a, government-run post office, or the DMV, and you immediately see the effects of like a governmental authority on things. It immediately leads to apathy and incompetence. But, a lot of the people that I know in Central Europe now, and I'm fortunate to know a few really cool people over there. I have a really good friend who used to live in East Germany. I know a guy in Hungary and whatnot. And it's like the people there now are this is one of the last places in Europe where people are very into these ideas about independence, decentralized governmental systems, and probably tribalism, because they went through generations of first being fucked by the Nazis, and then being fucked by the communists after that. So they can see that there's not, they just kind of have a rejection of both of them. And so they're they're trying to stay out of they're trying to avoid being subsumed by the EU and maintain independence over there. And that's like one of the last places on Earth right now at the moment. One of the interesting places, I would say, on Earth right now, that maybe there's some possibilities.
I think so. There's always, of course, a lot of talent and ability and so forth. It's just like this guy that I knew. He was Hungarian, but his mother's side of the family was German, and so they had like ethnic. You think this, communists, now we think of, well, it wouldn't be this, but it was. That was like, because your father is like an affirmative action, because your mother's side of the family is German, you don't get to go to medical school. I don't care what your grades are.
Right.
Because we're trying to, the German influence on the country and the Austro-Hungarian Empire thing, we're trying to cleanse the intelligentsia of German influence.
Right.
And so you can't stay. That's why he left. That was the main reason, because he wanted to become a physician. And nowadays he has a practice both in Germany, where he got his medical degree, and in Hungary. So he was able to go back and have a practice there too. But so how fast that's when people think, the world won't change. The world is changing in our lifetime. Dramatic, huge swings, changes. Things can change for the worse, as we've seen, and they can change for the better. But it's not. Things are certainly more volatile than most people believe they are.
Yeah.
Even when we confront systems like communism, as when we were growing up, I think that's going to be there forever. That's not going away. But I was really into, anti-communist romanticism. When I was growing up in 1968 was the time of the Czech Spring and all that, so that was in the news and all. And I read about 1956 in Hungary and that kind of thing. So I was all into that, and so I got to live a little bit of that. But see, there's again that Runa thing, or that being willing to do crazy stuff just for, and it comes down to an 18-year-old kid. That's the kind of thing where you go, I'm volunteering to go to Vietnam for an adventure. I'm 18, I'm just full of this kind of energy. I have no bit, that's what I'm programmed to have, right? And you do some dumb things sometimes, but if you survive, then I'm not saying it was any big, giant, heroic thing in my case, but, if you do get through it, it does make for a story one way or another.
Oh, it makes a great it makes a great story. It's very exciting. Yeah, very.
I remember this one thing talking about communism. I was hitchhiking at the end of my journey over there in the early 70s. I hitchhiked to Berlin and back, and that was an adventure. You could do that kind of thing back then. And I was with this guy, I was just there hitchhiking also, and also an American, and he was had this long hair, he was a hippie, and he was espousing these communist ideas. And, communism, it's really cool, man. It's really the way we ought to go. Let's free Angela Davis, man, and all that. And I thought, okay, whatever. And we were in this car with this German driver, and we were in the back seat, and and he was going on about this stuff right there, and I just said, look at this, look up on those, this guard station up there. See those two guys up there? Why there are two of them? Because the one guy's would run if he had the chance. These people are, and then on cue, this police guard, this border guard, leaned into the car and looked at that guy with his long hair and grabbed a hold of his hair and started jerking on it, saying, what are you doing? He just yelling at him and shit it's just abusing him.
Wow.
That was another quiet trip.
Wow.
So, I didn't want to say, but, here's your guy, this is your hero.
Right.
He knows better than you. You need to cut your hair, man.
Yeah.
Comrade says so.
Do you think he learned a lesson from that?
I don't think so. They just don't do it right, man.
Right. No, that's what they said. That wasn't real communism.
Yeah, he was some kind of, that wasn't there. They don't make you conform or anything, man. They just let you be free.
Right.
What?
But who's going to pay for it?
It's what's going on now. And you think, how can people be so stupid, and not realize where this kind of thinking ends? But yet, I saw, in that case, there are people who have it right in their face, who are being abused by it directly and still don't see the light. Because they have a preconceived belief that just one or two experiences or a word to the wise or whatever is not going to change easily or quickly.
Well, there's two things. One thing is that when people commit themselves to a certain ideology like that, and this is what happens with the president. You see this every 4 years in America. We see this in the presidential election cycle. When someone commits themselves to a certain, president, then they cannot admit, that they invested, their time and energy in something that is wrong. Because this is what always happens. A new president comes in, and then he immediately starts doing fucked up shit, but they can never admit that they invested in something wrong. And the other thing that's going on, though, is that if you step out of line, you have to support, when you have, you're living in a situation where, you have, secret police like that. Or, even you can see this in a microcosm of social media right now, where the danger of being publicly shamed about having the wrong idea,
right?
It causes people to kind of act like lemmings and just, kind of fly to whatever is the popular decision. Just kind of fly to that and stay there and be safe, because it's the expedient thing to do. If you have anything to lose, by being called out or being singled out like that,
Yeah, and but that the things which are the litmus tests for this sort of thing are kind of quacky, abstract, ideological constructs. They aren't practical things of life. See, that's where you could start to say, well, tribalism is kind of like that, just like my guy is my guy, my tribe, I support them because they are my tribe, et cetera, and so forth. So you may say, well, that's kind of a collective thinking or some of the similar kind of constructs. But I think that is where it was meant to be applied, just like socialism itself. In a family, we have socialism often, and nobody thinks about it. I mean, if my father has money and he says, oh, you're just starting out here, let me buy you a car, or let me do this or that. You didn't earn it. I'm giving it to you because you're family. I have it. You need it. I'm giving it. And it's okay because there's no resentment or anything because that's dear old dad. I mean, that's family. Aunt so-and-so gave me a car. Whatever it is, it's family socialism. There's an organic context for this, and we're all family, and so any outside, people, I don't care, my brother's crazy loon or whatever, I'm going to come to his defense, right? Because that's how it works. Now they're misapplying that, just like in politics. So, well, I'm a Trump person, or I'm a this person or that, and so then somebody attacks them. Then they get all, tribal and kind of like it's misspent or misplaced tribal instinct applied to macro politics, or really what's stuff they're seeing on TV, right? On the news channels or something, and they're getting all bent out of shape and all excitable about stuff they're seeing on TV, which has about as much to do with them as, any other soap opera.
Yeah. Well, to me, the difference, why tribalism, as I'm understanding how we're talking about it, the difference between that and collectivism is the absence of coercion in it, right? The fact that it's voluntary. If I voluntarily associate with a group of people because I'm going to get something out of it, and I want to, and I have common culture, language, or property, or whatever, but I'm voluntarily doing it, then that is like, to me, that's not collective. That's not the sense of the word collectivism. I know that it's kind of a broad way that people use that term, but to me, when I think of collectivism, in the way it's meant, like as being like an evil influence, in the way say Ayn Rand would like say collectivism, is because there's a coercive aspect to it. There's an obligation to do it. There's some kind of like force to be in there. And
there's no connection between you and the person. A triangle exists, right? Or there's you, and then there's the coercer, the state, or the people who are doing the coercing, and then the beneficiary of the activity. That is, there's a third party who is going to be the fruits of your efforts are going to be redistributed to them. And a lot of times people say, oh, you're talking about people welfare. No. For example, in the Soviet Union, if you saw pictures of what was going on in the streets in the heyday of the Soviet Union, the streets were broad and empty. There was no traffic. No one had a car. Yet there were motorcades of party officials being motored from place to place. They all had cars. Right. They all had dachas. They all had apartments, homes, farms. It was redistributed to the gang, to the gangsters.
Yeah.
I mean, that's who the beneficiary of it all ultimately is. But they may use, favored, reward favored groups or client people. I just call them clients. With some kind of reward for their loyalty, for their displays of blind loyalty or whatever, like giving them jobs such as they were and so forth. So, but you will, the producing person will be coerced into to disadvantage for the sake of the state, and we see that in unionism, right, where the union bosses, and then they have some kind of crazy, or some kind of a system whereby seniority, for example, or some other ideological litmus test is used to give who's going to get the promotion. That's why I always had a bad taste about unions, because when I was a little kid, my father was in a union. He was in a railroad union. He had to be. And he was a very competent person, you know. He did his work really well, and he was young. But he couldn't get anywhere in the railroad because it was unionized, and so if a good job came open, it was just the oldest dude in the building got that position. Yeah. He could even be what they call bumped. He could be his job could be taken away, his good job, and he could be bumped down or into a less desirable position because some my guy with more seniority wanted that job. That kind of stuff. That's collectivism, even, you know. So it's not just communist. I mean, it is kind of communist, you know, but it's everywhere, and that kind of thinking, and that's the way I understand, like in the Democratic Party, in the House of Representatives, that's why you have some of these characters in positions of power, because they run totally on a seniority system.
Yeah, and based on ideology too. Even the most basic economics will demonstrate. If you study basic economics, it will demonstrate why like communist systems cannot deal with scarcity, and so all communist systems have had incredible starvation, mass starvation at a certain point, because this is not even possible for a centralized government system to distribute, food and resources to people who need it as effectively as a free market can. And, the fact that, and this is why basic economics is not actually taught in public schools, because if enough people learned about the basics of this, everyone would see immediately that, no, it's ridiculous that you can't redistribute wealth that way effectively. That leads to mass starvation, and the next thing, then people start questioning, well, what about taxation and property tax and stuff? Isn't that the same thing? Well, yeah, it kind of is the same thing. And it only got really out of control in America under FDR, which was at the same time that we were competing, America was competing with, the Russians, the Soviet socialists and the National Socialists and the British socialists to see who could redistribute wealth more effectively in their home country. And now here we are,
Yeah,
I got another question. I got another question just come in here from John Grauerholtz. Question for Stephen Flowers: what is the best translation of the Havamal? Opinion of Jackson Crawford's translation.
I don't have. There are too many translations for me to keep up with them. So since I read the original, I don't read too many translations of it. Now, that's an interesting question, though, and in my opinion, no translation can satisfy the desire of the individual to understand what the text really says. And therefore, as a matter of fact, I'm going to do most of the Havamal in a future project of mine. And how I'm going to do this is to produce a document, and this is the only way that if you say, well, you're telling me that I got to learn the original language, which is, I know, too much to ask in the sense that you're asking somebody to learn a language that's just a little bit less hard than Russian to learn, and so that's not realistic. So so we have tools. I mean, these translations. Well, the only thing that's going to satisfy a person's desire to know exactly what the text is saying is that you have to have an interlinear translation wherein every word is accounted for exactly, and you are shown, even though you're not privy or not necessarily aware of how these words relate to one another through a case system such as Latin has, Old Norse has, etc., that has to be labeled so that you say this word is in this grammatical case and relates to it in this way. And you have to be a little bit made aware of how the language works in order to really understand, because people are interested in these texts in a very specific way about what is it really saying. So that translations which take poetic license to make it sound good or whatever are all going away from the spiritual person's desire to know exactly what is being said. So therefore, really what one needs is a translation which is a prose translation, which I don't know of any that are, where you just take the stanza in question and just translate it in a prose way, because with these highly inflected languages, such as Icelandic is, the words can be in just about any order you want, right? Because they relate to one another grammatically based upon their form, on their endings and such things. So the word order can be completely turned on its head. And so when somebody says, oftentimes I see this where, well, this says this translates to this, and the original text, they're trying to figure it out, the original text. So then they'll just identify the wrong word, with the translated word, and all kinds of horrible things happen. So I don't have any good news there on that front, but that is what would be necessary. And I'm working on a project now, which is really about a rune oracle, various runic oracles, and I've discovered this method by which the Havamal is actually a divinatory oracle. And so in so doing there, if you're going to then say, I want to know what the High One has to say to me on my issue at the moment, you have to be translations probably won't do, so I'm going to try to produce a text of exactly the kind I'm talking about for the Havamal with this. But I would say if one is interested enough to really want to know what's going on, then it would be probably best to pick up a book on Icelandic grammar, or what I did. I mean, I learned Old Norse in school and in the old-fashioned way, but then I delved into modern Icelandic, which is absolutely the same language. It's exactly the same language. It's a little bit different, maybe, different pronunciations sometimes. But if you learn, for example, just get the colloquial Icelandic that Routledge puts out, or teach yourself Icelandic, and work through that, and then get a dictionary, which you can get online. Get Please Be Vigfússon, the big Icelandic dictionary, or Zoega dictionary online, a PDF nowadays, I think, and you can start to be able to look up the words yourself, and puzzle it out, But you do need to do some basic work, and like I've taught German for years, and I'd always tell people, so, well, you can learn this, so it's no question. I mean, you've learned one language already, right? So, I mean, you can definitely learn a language, but you have to, it's work. It is work. There is no doubt about that. But there is a reward. And it's an unfortunate thing, our whole American attitude towards languages. People are more interested now. You see all these miracle, like a Rosetta Stone or anybody. They're just marketing languages like crazy now. And, I dabble in some of those kinds of things. And as a teacher and somebody who's mastered a few languages, I look at these things and I always say, you never give up on the belief that there is some miracle method or something, and there isn't. It takes X amount of work, X amount of effort, number of hours, applied, but there are resources. Technology is providing things that couldn't be acquired before, making it easier, more access to more information. But I would stay away from, don't believe in any translation you see as far as that's concerned. Just that if one is that interested, then that's what one needs to do. It's not like it's not as hard as trying to learn Sanskrit or Tibetan or ancient Egyptian or something like that, right? I mean, much of our language we're speaking now is full of Old Norse words. Our whole personal pronoun system, all the there, them, those, and all of that, that's all Norse words, Norse constructs, not Old English ones. That shows how much the Scandinavian language influenced English in ancient times, in the Viking Age. So it's part of our thing. It's doable, certainly, but that's the method I would use. Not try to learn Old Norse out of some old dusty book or with a whole bunch of linguistics and things like that, but learn basic Icelandic as a living language, and then apply that knowledge with an Old Norse grammar and dictionary. And as a matter of fact, I can give you the key sort of piece of bibliography. Of course, I have it right here. The book is a glossary of Heed to the Elder, to the Poetic Edda itself, by Beatrice Lafarge and John Tucker, called A Glossary to the Poetic Edda. So it's a dictionary that is just to the Poetic Edda. So it goes really a long way in honing in on just the passages in the work, and so you wouldn't even need the dictionary. Although the dictionary, like a Cleesby Vigfusson, this big giant dictionary, will give you, and that's one of the things about the language when you look at the original, is you may have a word, and a translator is going to pick an English word to translate that word with, right? And then all of the connotations of that English word flood into your brain at the moment you read it. Only part of, or maybe none of, those connotations belong to the Old Norse word. Mm-hmm. So you have to go to the Old Norse dictionary and look at that Old Norse word and say, well, how could this word be translated otherwise? What is its semantic field? What did it connote to the speaker of that language? What are the other meanings of it? And sometimes there's 5, 6 different meanings, and sometimes that's why you say, why do the translations of texts of these old texts diverge so much from one another? It's because they're picking different meanings. It's their interpretation as to what way they're going to translate it. And so what you have to go back to is what are the connotations, also the etymology of that word, so that if you can read German, you can go, there's a Old Norse etymological dictionary, which tells you kind of where those words come from and what their ancient antecedents are and so forth. So you start to get a real picture of what that word really means. And like at university when we were studying old languages, whether it was Middle High German, Old Norse, whatever, one of the things you have to do is do word studies. And that would be like, you take this word and like urður, let's say, like weird, fate, however you want to, urður. And you take that word and then you say, okay, I'm going to study that word. And you say, what's its etymology? Where does it come from? How is it used? What are the different ways in which, what are all of the meanings of it? Then once you get that into your brain, then when you see that word, all that stuff is there. It's not just urður equals fate. it's a mistranslation to begin with. Second of all the stuff that we believe about fate comes flooding into our brain when we read it, and we are actually no less, we were misled by the translation, right? We don't come closer to understanding, but further away. Wow. So those are the dangers. Those are just the dangers of translations of anything. So anytime you're dealing with a translation of any kind of original, you're dealing with a work inspired by the original, but not the exact equivalent of the original.
I think one of the key components to learning another language, foreign language, and this doesn't apply to old languages, it applies to languages that people speak currently, is beer.
Mm-hmm.
And I was told this by a German guy. So, look, I learned German. I took German when I was in high school for 3 years. And then I got out of high school, and then, I never spoke it with anyone else who was actually German. And so then when I met, some actual German people years later, actually after I lived in Houston, and I met some guys, and, we started, talking, and, these guys didn't know any more English than I knew German at the time.
Yeah.
But we had beer. And because of that, we were able to, start with words around, what's the word for beer? What's the word for I want another beer? And then you just build from there. And the same thing happened to me. The same thing happened to me when I was in Russia. I was in Russia when I went to Moscow, and I was playing with the band Red Flag. Same thing over there. You start out with the basics, and once you have a beer with someone, everything just starts to flow from there, and you start to piece everything together.
Get your inhibitions down. That's another.
Exactly. No, that's one thing that makes people afraid about learning a foreign language. Is they're afraid, I'm going to say it wrong, and everyone's going to laugh at me. But you get the inhibitions down, and you don't care if anyone's going to laugh at you. Everyone's laughing at each other anyhow.
Sure. Well, yeah, you gotta jump in to be willing or embrace the making of mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. I mean, that's always, as a teacher, I would try to tell, I make mistakes. I will make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. Also, in pronouncing, for example, words, you have to make your mouth and tongue do weird things. Sometimes your face does different things. The muscles move in different ways, and people are reluctant to actually move their muscles in ways that are not familiar to them. And so you do them exercises, make them make funny faces, and, getting the inhibitions down and getting sort of warmed up and getting that kind of thing going is essential to getting proficiency and just getting over some psychological barriers. But we do a very poor job having taught us the way we teach. It's just not, a classroom is not the place to learn the language. It's got to be one-on-one or informal. There's got to be better methods, right? I would say that schools like universities should say, look, we're not going to teach these people, these hundreds of people, foreign languages in these classes of 20 people, things like that. So I'd say, let's try to reduce the language requirement. Of course, they don't do that because the departments make money by having courses, right? And so, therefore, they want big classes and numerous sections of these things. That's the economics of the university.
No, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ludicrous to think that you can teach someone a foreign language when they don't want to. They don't have an individual want or need to learn that language. It's ludicrous. But schools are like, oh, no, well, we have to teach them a foreign language to fulfill some idealistic need, so we can demonstrate that we're using the stolen money to educate people in some way that's going to benefit some future, like, society where we imagine
squandered resources. If they took that money and said, these are the students who really want to learn it, and these are the professions or the majors which really need to know this stuff, and would benefit greatly, from knowing it, then you say, we're going to teach 10% of what we're trying to teach now. We're going to just teach 10% of that amount, and we're going to do it in a completely different way. We will, you can, like my experience with German, I went to Berlitz school when I was just in high school. I was interested in learning German. Obviously, I went over there to go to language school, but before I went, I was interested, and so I knew kids in my high school that were taking German, and they didn't know crap, They couldn't do anything. Or know anything. I'd ask them questions, I was trying to learn it on my own. It was ridiculous. And but they seemed incompetent. So I said, this is obviously not working for these people. So I went to the Berlitz school, which did work, because they are sitting there one-on-one. There's a guy sitting there, a German guy, and he don't speak anything but German. And it's just like hours, sometimes 2 hours, how much ever you can take. And as a 17-year-old or whatever, I could take pretty much. And so, it was pretty intense for just a few weeks. And in 6 weeks, I learned more than kids at high school learned more. And they learned in a year, well over that. So if you just sit people down and use these more direct methods, you can, and once you get a person started in a language and they're not perfect, but they've broken through the ice, they're thinking in the language, even if it's just me, Tarzan, you, Jane kind of stuff, they're thinking in it, then they've broken through and they can start just really learning on their own through exposure to native speakers, going to these countries and being just bombarded with information from the fountain, from the original source, and they will just be, they will do things that are really practical, really work, and so forth, that just years of sitting in a classroom will not get done, will not happen.
Yeah.
But there are methods. We know how to do it, really, but it's the economics of the university which holds progress back.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I have another question here from a Twitter follower, Cranky Puss, wants to know, what do you think of the new Thor superhero movies?
I wouldn't know. I haven't seen any of them. Crystal, my wife, Crystal, she said, what about I'm going to rent, on Netflix or whatever, this Thor movie. I said, I don't want to see that, And then so it's like, when I was a little kid, I was into comic books for a while, like all little kids, but I was into weird kind of comic books, at the time. This was like the mid-'60s. They were put out by this company called Marvel. Yeah. And, everybody else is watching Batman and, Superman. And it's like, oh, look at these Fantastic Four, whatever it was, Dr. Doom. And so I was in it, I was there. I mean, that was all cool, But like a lot of things that are fantasy or whatever, I love it. I support it. I think it's great because it opens up interest in the old images and traditions and all that. And I'm not saying that that's ridiculous and stupid or whatever. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I just don't have the motivation, to sit there and watch them. But I think it's good. Certainly, we should have much more of our this kind of thing. Like when I was a kid, see, kids today or people today of all ages, they can't get a clear picture, or it's harder to get a clear picture of what's real and not real as far as mythic images or historical images, right? Like, let's say 1965 or 60s, I'm sitting there early 60s, and I'm thinking, well, I'm watching the 300 Spartans, or I'm watching Cleopatra or Ben-Hur or the Ten Commandments. There's Pharaoh, and all that, and images. I mean, we had clear. This is what Egypt looked like, This is what ancient Rome looked like. But nowadays, I think there's so much fantasy mixed with everything that there's not like a clear thing like, well, that is fake. That's like somebody's idea of some, silly nonsense. And this is like, has some modicums of when I hear an ancient Roman army is marching down the road, as a little kid, I could get a pretty good image through having seen them in movies of what a Roman army looked like, a real Roman army. And so that, but nowadays I think there's so much pure fantasy mixed with that nobody knows a Roman. I don't know what that. I don't think you could get a clear image from tell a 8-year-old kid, 8-year-old boy, say, here, draw me a picture of a Roman soldier. That they would get anything close to what they actually looked like.
Yeah,
that's my opinion. I may be wrong, but it wasn't that we were all all studying this kind of stuff. Although actually some of my friends were, we were like reading mythology. Edith Hamilton. It wasn't part of the what the teachers were telling us to read, but we just. Because we saw all these things in the movies like Jason and the Argonauts or whatever. That was just our Saturday afternoon movies. And, then we started reading about them and things like that. So, I don't know. It could be great stuff as far as Thor and those kind of things. But like all things that are fictionalized, you have to say, well, I will learn something about what the creators of this narrative want me to believe or think, but it might not be what's in the Edda or what the poets of the Edda wanted me to think or believe. You see what I mean?
Right. No, absolutely. So, I think, I feel that, like, Hollywood has pretty much they destroyed superheroes for me. Because I used to read these comic books in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I read Marvel, and I read the X-Men, and I read, Iron Man, and all these things, the Avengers that are going on now, and Thor, and all that. And it's like Hollywood is like ruined it. In the same way, Hollywood, I feel they've ruined Star Wars also. They just absolutely destroyed Star Wars.
They lost me at the Ewoks.
Right.
The Ewoks, that was it for me.
Yeah, the Ewoks killed it for me. I was all the way up through episode 5 through Empire Strikes Back. Empire Strikes Back, where he goes and he meets Yoda, and he goes into the cave with Yoda. Luke goes into the cave with Yoda, like the descent of the epic hero. And he confronts evil himself as Darth Vader, and I'm your father. He cuts off his hand. It's like, I'm your father. That was just epic heroism to me, and to me that's always just Star Wars up through that one. And yeah, the Ewoks, everything after that is just like, it's just bullshit.
At that moment you're going, uh-oh.
Right.
Something's happening here. I don't know. I don't like it.
Yeah. I felt a lot. Yeah. And did you know that Natalie, like in the next Thor movie, Natalie Portman is going to play Thor.
Oh, we're getting into now they were getting all Eddic. I was always wondering when they ever have Thor, I don't know this, when it happened in the movies, did he ever do any cross-dressing in the movie?
I've not seen him do any cross-dressing yet, but there's a famous story about Thor, right, where he cross-dresses.
Yes, where he the famous he dresses in bridal gown, outfit, and impersonates Freya in order to get his hammer back.
Right.
So, there's I used to run a little blurb once, about the X-rated Edda. There's all sorts of sexual perversions in there, but they're just, of course, half lines, and like Njörður, this Avonic god, Loki points out, says, that these maidens, pissed in his mouth, and he was apparently liking it, but because none of the accusations that Loki makes are lies, they're just family secrets or whatever. So there's cross-dressing, water sports, all kinds of stuff in the Edda. Well, Loki, has his balls tied to a goat and pulls on it to make Skavi laugh, and some pretty bawdy scenes there.
Yeah.
But that's like in paganism, any kind of pagan, humor and outlandish things are not forbidden.
Yeah.
But,
excellent.
But yeah, that's I don't like this series. I watched one episode of this thing called American Gods, and it's kind of like where the Norse gods are, are like humans, but it's like a surreal kind of. I mean, it's just like too much. It was just constant, using CGI for bodies flying apart and gooey, horrible, gory messes, and part of it is like there's a great popularity of Viking shows and that kind of thing on television now apparently, and I again support that because that puts that sells books for me. I mean, people get interested in it, and then they think, well, there's a certain small percentage of people will actually go, on to explore. So that's all good. I'm not saying anything bad about it. But what it kind of gets to me sometimes is like the way that like a Viking or something like that is just depicted as typically just like you're falling right into the way the monks describe them, as demonic entities. They're like, serial killers with oars, just like in a ship. But, they weren't that, And so that's just they apparently, that's again, a Viking is a guy you can disrespect, or you can stereotype and put a negative kind of a image on him, all you want, kind of a thing. And nobody's going to complain because what difference does it make?
Yeah, no, I think the biggest problem you hit on it right there with like CGI. It's like they realized, we can do all these special effects now. Like that was always the problem throughout the '90s. There was always these rumors that. And this is when I was like getting really into the X-Men. I was reading the X-Men comics, and there's all these rumors. They're going to make a movie someday, but how are they going to do all of those special powers and stuff? It's too much. It's always a problem. And so what happened is that movie didn't come out. It's like after CGI became like just normal, right? Because the first, first couple of movies that had CGI, it was like real controversial. It's like, you can tell, and it's like combining cartoons with movies. But eventually, like really quickly, it just became synthesized to where it's really hard for people to tell the difference. And so now they can do anything in it. And because they can do anything, they exploit that. And that's cheaper for them to do that, to make a movie with all these like just crazy special effects, people flying everywhere and, bodies exploding. It's cheaper for them to do that than to write good storylines.
Right.
And to make an interesting, engaging like storyline, it's cheaper and more effective for them to like move through it. And
it has the same narrative structure as hardcore pornography used to have back when they had movies, hardcore movies with stories. Sometimes back in, before that went away entirely. But they'd have stories and but it was just like. The narrative is just get to the next sex scene, right? That's it. That's all we're doing with the story is just to go from one to the next.
The story is just, the story's like 30 seconds of like setup about why these people are here, and then bang, get to the money shot.
So that's it. But that really makes it easier on the writers, but of course it destroys the whole interest in stories and where you really engage people's minds, imaginations, and so forth. It's like my friend who just recently died, guy by the name of Bill Whitliff, who's did some interesting films, wrote scripts. He's a screenwriter mainly, although he directed the Lonesome Dove series also. And he's really into the American West, but he also did other things. And he was a writer, really. I mean, he was telling me, I started off, I just kind of fortuitously got a job in the late 70s with him packing books for him. He had his Texana press, And I did some mythic analyses of some of his early screenplays that he was just finished. They hadn't been made yet. One called Barbarossa and another one called Raggedy Man. And he just told me, he said, well, telling a story, you got to make people care about your character, the character, and then have things happen to them. But anything that happens to them will be interesting to the viewer because they care about the character, right? So it can be what appears to be ordinary kind of events, but they can have great impact because they are like real to the person who's viewing it. And but that's like really storytelling. But as the time went on, towards the end of his career, he just got away from movies because there was no. And he just started writing novels because he couldn't get the money to tell the kind of stories he wanted to tell. Right? There was no violent, car scenes and crashes, and I mean, they were westerns, had violence and things like that in them. He redid this Legends of the Fall. He wrote the screenplay for that. It was based on a book, but he did it. He improved on the book actually. And very heroic, very violent, manly men kind of stuff. But they were real stories about real people, but not just totally dependent on just crazy violence, Right. And so you can't get money to make the kinds of movies he wanted to make anymore. And the hoops you have to jump through and the creative control you have to give, that was always the case with the movies, But so he just went off and said, yeah. Writing novels, you take total control with what you're telling the story.
Wow. Well, Dr. Flowers.
Yes.
I have to thank you for spending this time with us this evening. And
thank you for listening to my old man rambles.
Oh no, it's been wonderful. I love them. Do you have any final words for all of us, for all of my listeners, so they will have something that will help them to survive the dark times before us?
Well, I would say the main thing for the survival of the individual, and not just survival, but again going back to the idea of happiness in the simplest kind of a way that I know of that has worked for me, is the embracing of the idea of seeking the mystery. What I call Rune till Runa, that is Old Norse for seek the mysteries. And to realize that life is full of mystery, the world is full of mystery and the unknown, and that's what excites and stimulates us as human beings, our divine selves, is the discovery of the unknown, just like reading a book, turning the page, what's on the next page, what's over the hill, that adventurism of mind and body, of experience, inner and outer, and seeking the unknown, and always realizing you don't know everything. All real knowledge begins with an assumption of ignorance. If people believe they already know everything that's worth knowing, then they're lost. Mm-hmm. They'll never be happy with that kind of attitude. Be ready to embrace the mystery.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Flowers, we really look forward to Retribalize Now coming out. I know you got a lot of other great books coming out, and we appreciate all of them. Keep putting them out, and keep doing the great work that you're doing. And Rhine till Runa.
Rhine till Runa.
All right. So,
that's it for that part, as I say.
That's it. Yeah, no, that's it for that part.